Hi everyone, welcome back to the Nomad and welcome to another Top 5 Wednesday. Today I'm going to be doing Top 5 Favourite Villains. Since it's Victober, I thought I'd do a Victober edition of my Top 5 Favourite Villains. So sit back, enjoy and let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my choices. Starting off with, I think, a little bit of an obvious selection, it's going to be Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Now, I find him an interesting villain because he pursues his villainy with wanton abandon. He just has this kind of idea that he could get away with everything possibly bad he could think of. And of course, towards the end, he realizes how horrible he's been and tries to redeem himself, but realizes in his own attempts of redemption, he's in fact still acting as the villain. So to have this kind of villainous character come as a 360 and realize that he is in fact a villain and realize his own demise in his own story, I find highly fascinating. Now, Oscar Wilde also talks a lot about the concepts of beauty and art in this story as well, but I always love how the Victorian era were challenging the concepts of beauty, which were considered good and kind and virtuous, and having this very deceptive villainous character underneath, because I'm sure if you've read quite a few Victorian novels, you'll find many of the criminal element have a very distinct look. They look poor, they looked big featured, they're not refined, they're not beautiful, they're not considering or worthy of art. So that's why I find Dorian Gray such an interesting villain for the Victorian period. Now, jumping across the Atlantic into some excellent American writers during the Victorian time, I'm definitely going to have to go with Edgar Allan Poe. Now, in his tales of mystery and imagination, there is the tale of the Telltale Heart, and I loved the character in this. It is such a raw depiction of guilt and this person who's realised they've done a crime and they're still trying to get away with it, but there's this gnawing sense of guilt weighing upon them and it just drives them mad. And I just love how this is depicted. Of course, at no point in this story are you ever sorry or feel any empathy for this character, because what he did was truly heinous. But I just find the depiction of his mental state to be absolutely intriguing, especially for the Victorian era, because they hadn't gone into psychology. That was very late. So to have Edgar Allan Poe writing on the psychology of a killer and the psychology of a killer's guilt going into that was quite remarkable stuff for the mid-Victorian era. So I do find Edgar Allan Poe's quite fascinating in his depiction of the human mind and the human condition, especially in these very dark and gruesome stories. Next, I actually can't find my copy, but it is in Tess d'Urberville's Angel Clare. Now, I have great issue with this story because it is a poignant piece that Hardy was trying to write about how women are supposed to be constantly faithful, they're supposed to be virtuous, they're supposed to be all these amazing things, but still retain a level of purity about them in a world that is impure in itself. And so to have a very pure, beautiful, caring woman have something terrible happen to her, but yet it is deemed as her fault, is what Hardy was trying to remark upon. Now, what I find a great problem with Angel Clare is that he is all what is virtuous in a suitor of the time. He is kind, he is generous, and he is just a beautiful person to begin with. So unfortunately what happens is, sorry, spoiler alert for anyone who has not read the story, but Tess is abused and Angel is not her abuser, but he marries her because he finds her absolutely gorgeous. He really truly sees her for what she is, or at least for what he wanted her to be. So they're talking one night and they're doing some confessions to each other. So Angel actually tells her that he in fact had slept with a woman and that he had an affair with a woman many, many years ago. And so Tess, believing this to be a safe space, shares her own past about her being assaulted and then carrying a baby to full term from that assault. And of course, Angel, not seeing that the conditions for women are the same as men, turns on her quite quickly. Even though they're married, he turns her out of his house, out of his family, and she basically becomes a ruined woman, just on the basis of his opinion of women being completely different to that of men, and that being the upstanding moral. So he could not have a wife who had sinned before, but he could have sinned. And that absolutely outraged me at the time. I think I was 15 when I read this, and I just remember being so angry at him. Of course, as the story goes, he sees a redemptive quality in her, but of course she's died by that time, and it's only through her death that he really forgives her. And I just find that even more frustrating, that in order to achieve his forgiveness for something that she did not do, but just for the fact that she was abused and ruined for society's expectation. So he's a very villainous character in my opinion, because he is depicting everything that is good with Victorian society and Victorian men, but then how quickly they can turn against Victorian women. So I find that utterly interesting, very much in the vein of what Oscar Wilde was doing. It's really challenging society's views and society's viewpoints. Alright, so next onto the physical books, and my next choice is going to be Richard Mason from Jane Eyre. Now, I do have problems with Rochester. I do find his character can be at fault at times, but to me, one of the true villains of this story is Richard Mason. One, because he comes as a very fawning and simpering character, and he visits Rochester and he causes much fear and turbulation in Rochester's life. But also because he keeps inflicting this pain and suffering upon Rochester and Rochester's wife. So there is going to be spoilers for this one, because Richard Mason is in fact Rochester's brother-in-law. He is the brother of Bertha Mason, who is Rochester's wife. Now, there is a little bit of hinting and scandal behind Bertha Mason. She is considered a fallen woman, and Rochester claims that he did not know this when he married her, and he was tricked into marrying. So not only did Richard Mason, his father, and even Rochester's father arrange this marriage in order to make a quick and easy meal of it, but it ensured that there's something wrong with the family background, the Mason background itself. There's an element to say that Bertha inherited this from her mother, but there's a few elements in there that to say that the family itself was quite villainous. Now, of course, you don't get much of Richard Mason in the fact that he is attacked in the story, but to have him be attacked is quite symbolic of how Bertha thinks of him, and also how he must have treated her in the past. And there's no sympathy from Jane's side of things, as he's a very mysterious character that causes a lot of harm and upset. But I think there's a lot more happening in his backstory than Charlotte Bronte lets on. So I think he is a very deceiving and villainous character who you don't really see his full picture, but you can see it in the aftermath of what had happened previously in that marriage, in what happened to Bertha, in her response to him. So I think the villainy is there for Richard Mason, and I feel that he's a very subtle character, but he's a character nonetheless that I think Charlotte Bronte was trying to bring into the scene to have this sense of foreboding from the colonies, from the West Indies, to have this kind of outsider but yet accepted insider into the British society. Now lastly, one of my favourite Victorian villains that I love to hate, and that is none other than Mr. Tulkinghorn in Bleak House by Charles Dickens. I had to throw a Dickens in here, of course. He writes some absolutely fantastic villainous characters. I was considering Oliver Twist and things like that, but Mr. Tulkinghorn won far and away the best one, because he believes in the law. The law is black and white, but at the same time, if he believes that the law works better for one client than it does another, and if it works better for one person than it does another, all the merrier for his client and for himself. So he's very much in the way of protecting his clients' legal aspects with little or no respect to what they're feeling, their requests, or their heart. So he's a very interesting character because he is, in a way, upholding the legal traditions and standards that Victorian society were implementing at the time. But there's this lack of empathy and this lack of a human soul in Mr. Tulkinghorn that I find him very curious. Now, of course, if you don't want to read this ginormous tome of a book, or at least start it anytime soon, you You can definitely check out the BBC adaptation. It is played by Charles Dance, who is absolutely petrifying as Mr. Tulkinghorn, and he plays it so well. It is absolutely astounding. So I definitely recommend checking out Bleak House or any Dickens for his wonderful character play. Alright, so thank you for joining me. This is my Victober themed Top 5 Wednesday. If you have any disagreements with any of my villainous characters, or if you have a few to add to my list, let me know down below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me. Bye!